The crisp autumn air of Willow Creek carried a haunting stillness on the night of November 13, 2023. Beneath the orange glow of streetlights, a police cruiser's siren shattered the silence, its piercing wail echoing through the otherwise serene suburban enclave. At the heart of the chaos stood the Blackwell Manor, its meticulously landscaped lawn now marred by the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles. Neighbors peered cautiously from their windows and front porches, whispering in hushed tones. The Blackwells were the golden couple of Willow Creek, a shining example of success and stability. Yet, as paramedics wheeled out a body covered in a white sheet, the veneer of perfection that had long cloaked Zane and Lila Blackwell's lives began to crumble under the harsh spotlight of tragedy. Zane sat motionless on the cold stone steps of his porch, his trembling hands smeared with blood. His face was ashen, his sharp features twisted in shock and despair. A uniformed officer loomed over him, his notebook open but unused, as Zane stared vacantly into the night, whispering to no one in particular. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Inside the house, chaos reigned. The once pristine living room, a testament to Lila's artistic touch, was now a scene of violence. A shattered lamp lay amidst the broken remnants of an ornate vase, and the coffee table was pushed askew, its sharp corner glistening with a crimson stain. The walls, adorned with family photos and tasteful artwork, bore silent witness to the horror that had unfolded mere moments ago. Detective Rachel Frost arrived shortly after, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. A veteran of the Denver Homicide Division, she had seen countless acts of violence, but something about the contrast between the carefully curated perfection of the Blackwell Manor and the brutality of what had occurred inside unsettled her. She ducked under the yellow crime scene tape and stepped cautiously into the room, her boots crunching softly against shards of porcelain. "Talk to me," she said curtly to Dr. Ken Nakamura, the forensic pathologist already examining the victim's body. Lila Blackwell lay sprawled on the floor, her chestnut hair fanned out like a dark halo around her head. A deep gash marked her temple, and the pool of blood beneath her told a grim tale. "Blunt force trauma to the head," Nakamura replied, glancing up. "Likely struck the corner of that coffee table during a fall. Signs of a struggle are evident, bruising on her arms, defensive wounds on her hands." Frost's gaze shifted to Zane, visible through the open doorway, still sitting outside in stunned silence. His face bore fresh scratches, his shirt rumpled and stained with what could only be blood. "What's his story?" Frost asked. "He claims it was an accident," replied Officer Daniels, who had been the first to respond to the scene. "An argument that got out of hand. Says she slipped and fell during the fight." Frost frowned, her instincts tingling. "And do you believe him?" Daniels hesitated. "I don't know. He's not acting like someone who just lost his wife. He's too composed." Frost nodded, filing the observation away. She knew better than to take appearances at face value. "Bag his clothes. We'll need his hands tested for blood spatter. And I want this entire room photographed, every detail." Outside, the quiet hum of the neighborhood was broken by the sharp bark of a dog. A man walking his golden retriever paused at the edge of the Blackwell property, his face pale as he took in the scene. He had heard the commotion earlier, angry shouting, the crash of something heavy falling, followed by an eerie silence that hung like a weight in the air. It was a terrible sound, he told a nearby officer. Like someone's whole world collapsing. The officer nodded grimly, ushering him back toward the sidewalk. Back inside, Frost crouched beside the coffee table, her eyes narrowing as she noted the height and angle of the bloodstain. Something about the trajectory didn't sit right. The fall might not have been accidental. Turning to Nakamura, she asked, "Could this wound have been inflicted intentionally?" "A push, maybe?" "It's possible," Nakamura said carefully, his brow furrowing. "We won't know for certain until the autopsy." Frost straightened, her mind already racing ahead. The Blackwells had been a picture of suburban bliss, but this scene told a different story, a tale of anger, violence, and a marriage that had unraveled under the weight of its secrets. Whatever had happened in this house tonight, one thing was certain: it wasn't the accident Zane Blackwell claimed it to be. As Frost stepped outside into the cold night air, she found herself watching Zane again. His blank stare had shifted to his hands, as if the blood on them held answers he couldn't face. He looked up briefly, his eyes locking with Frost's, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his gaze. Fear. Or guilt. Perhaps both. "Take him in," Frost said finally. "We're just getting started." The morning sun rose over Willow Creek, painting the suburban neighborhood in a golden glow that belied the darkness brewing beneath its surface. Rows of craftsman-style homes lined the tree-shaded streets, each meticulously maintained to project an air of perfection. Among them, the Blackwell Manor stood out, not for its extravagance but for the impression of warmth and stability it exuded. Its white picket fence, colorful flower beds, and gleaming front porch swing suggested a life well lived, a family in harmony. To outsiders, Zane and Lila Blackwell were the embodiment of the American dream. But behind the closed doors of their pristine home lay cracks in the foundation, invisible to the neighbors who envied their life. Zane Blackwell, 36, was the quintessential success story. As the director of product innovation at TechLink Innovations in Boulder, Colorado, he was the kind of man who turned heads in boardrooms with his sharp intellect, confident demeanor, and a smile that seemed to promise solutions to unsolvable problems. Standing tall with a lean, runner's physique, Zane carried himself with the poise of someone accustomed to achievement. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, Zane harbored a storm of insecurities. Growing up as the only child of a bitter divorce, he had witnessed firsthand the chaos of a fractured family. His father's abandonment left a scar that no amount of professional success could mend. Stability, control, and a picture-perfect life weren't just desires for Zane, they were necessities. His marriage to Lila, a woman who seemed to epitomize grace and loyalty, was supposed to be the anchor that kept his world steady. But lately, Zane felt that anchor slipping. Lila Blackwell, 34, was Zane's opposite in many ways, yet their differences had once drawn them together like two halves of a whole. A freelance graphic designer with a creative spirit, Lila was the kind of person who lit up a room without trying. Her warm, hazel eyes and effortless charm made her the darling of the Willow Creek community. She grew up in a bustling, loving family, surrounded by the noise and chaos of siblings who taught her how to navigate relationships with grace and resilience. When Lila met Zane at a friend's wedding in Denver nearly a decade ago, she was captivated by his drive and determination. He, in turn, was drawn to her free-spirited nature, a lightness he lacked but admired. Their whirlwind romance led to a lavish wedding at a lakeside estate, and for years, they seemed to live the life every couple aspired to have. But by the summer of 2023, something had shifted. The cracks began subtly, a quiet tension during dinner, missed moments of affection, nights spent apart in the same house. Their once passionate marriage had dulled into a routine of polite cohabitation. Zane, ever focused on control, tried to ignore it, while Lila, yearning for more, started seeking ways to rekindle the spark they had lost. It was Lila who first suggested exploring something new. A close friend had mentioned a workshop in Denver about tantric practices and reigniting intimacy in long-term relationships. At first, Zane balked at the idea. It seemed unnecessary, even indulgent. But Lila, persistent and hopeful, convinced him to attend. The workshop opened a door neither of them expected. What began as a discussion about fantasies and boundaries led to the revelation of desires they had never shared before. Lila had always been more adventurous in their relationship, and as they delved deeper into conversations about trust and exploration, the idea of swinging surfaced. Zane was hesitant. The very notion of sharing Lila, even in a consensual and controlled environment, sent a ripple of unease through him. But Lila's enthusiasm was infectious, and her reasoning was sound. "It's not about replacing what we have," she had said one night, her voice soft yet resolute. "It's about strengthening it. Rediscovering each other." Against his better judgment, Zane agreed. The swinging community in Denver was nothing like Zane had imagined. It wasn't seedy or lurid but rather polished and discreet. Their first event, a low-key mixer hosted at a boutique cafe called the Velvet Bean, introduced them to couples who were open-minded, confident, and surprisingly relatable. Among them were Eli and Nina Sterling, a pair of artists whose charisma was magnetic. Eli Sterling was everything Zane was not: bohemian, carefree, and unapologetically confident. His piercing blue eyes and easy smile seemed to linger a second too long when he looked at Lila. Nina Sterling, by contrast, was warm and grounded, acting as the balancing force to Eli's boldness. The Sterlings quickly became more than acquaintances, they were guides into this unfamiliar world. At first, the experiment seemed to work. The Blackwells found themselves reconnecting, rediscovering a passion they thought had faded. But as the weeks turned into months, the newness began to take a toll. Zane's insecurities, once buried, started clawing their way to the surface. The sight of other men looking at Lila with admiration, desire, even, gnawed at him. He began to notice the way Lila seemed to light up in the presence of Eli, the lingering touches and shared laughter that felt too intimate. And yet, Zane said nothing. In public, they maintained their facade of a perfect couple, hosting dinner parties and engaging in synchronized morning runs that inspired envy from their neighbors. But inside the walls of Blackwell Manor, a quiet war was brewing, and both Zane and Lila were arming themselves with unspoken resentments. The Blackwells had entered the world of swinging in search of excitement, but what they found was something far darker, a reflection of their own insecurities, their unspoken fears, and the unraveling threads of their marriage. As the summer faded into autumn, the tension that simmered between them was no longer contained. It was only a matter of time before the cracks gave way to chaos. By the time August rolled around, the Blackwells' lives had shifted in ways neither of them could have anticipated. What started as a tentative agreement to explore something new, had blossomed into an uncharted territory that was as exhilarating as it was unsettling. At the heart of this transformation was the swinging community in Denver, a world Lila had embraced with open arms and Zane had reluctantly followed her into. Their initiation was cautious. Lila, ever the optimist, spent hours researching the lifestyle, reading forums, and watching videos that painted it as an adventure rather than a taboo. Zane, however, approached the idea with skepticism. The very notion of sharing his wife with strangers seemed to undercut everything he had worked so hard to build, a stable, controlled life where love was exclusive and predictable. But Lila's enthusiasm was infectious, and her promises of rekindled intimacy and deeper trust eventually won him over. Their first event was a meet and greet at the Velvet Bean, a boutique cafe nestled in the artsy district of Denver. The gathering was discreet, attended by well-dressed professionals and free-spirited couples who carried themselves with a mix of confidence and charm. The setting was intimate, with low lighting and soft jazz playing in the background, far removed from the sordid imagery Zane's mind had conjured. Lila, as always, thrived in social situations. She moved through the room with ease, her laughter mingling with the hum of conversation as she introduced herself to strangers who quickly became acquaintances. Zane, on the other hand, felt out of place. He nursed a drink by the bar, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd, his discomfort evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. He couldn't help but feel that everyone else in the room belonged to a club he wasn't sure he wanted to join. That was when they met Eli and Nina Sterling. The Sterlings exuded a magnetism that was impossible to ignore. Eli was tall, with piercing blue eyes and an air of effortless confidence that bordered on arrogance. His charm was as smooth as his laughter was rich, and when he turned his attention to Lila, it lingered just long enough to make Zane's chest tighten. Nina, by contrast, was grounded and approachable, her warm smile putting Zane at ease in a way few others had managed that evening. The four of them clicked instantly. Over glasses of wine and casual conversation, the Sterlings shared their experiences in the lifestyle, offering tips and reassurances that felt more like friendly advice than recruitment. "It's not about replacing love," Nina said at one point, her voice steady. "It's about enhancing it. Broadening your horizons together." Eli chimed in, his eyes locked on Lila. "And let's be honest, there's something thrilling about stepping outside the box. It keeps things fresh." Lila's laughter rang out, her cheeks flushed from the wine and Eli's attention. Zane forced a smile, his grip tightening around his glass. The words were easy enough to agree with in theory, but the way Eli looked at Lila made his stomach churn. Their first real foray into swinging came 2 weeks later at an intimate gathering hosted by the Sterlings at their penthouse in downtown Denver. The space was everything Zane expected from a pair of artists, open, eclectic, and bathed in warm, ambient lighting that made everyone look effortlessly attractive. Couples mingled with drinks in hand, the air buzzing with flirtation and unspoken possibilities. Zane was out of his element, but Lila thrived. She moved through the room like she belonged there, her natural charisma drawing people to her in a way that made Zane feel like a shadow in his own marriage. He watched from a distance as she laughed with Eli, the two of them sharing a private joke that made his chest tighten once again. The evening culminated in what the community referred to as a soft swap, a night of flirtation and connection without crossing certain physical boundaries. It was thrilling, intoxicating even, and for a brief moment, Zane allowed himself to believe Lila was right. The experience did reignite a spark between them. That night, they went home hand in hand, whispering about their shared adventure like teenagers sneaking out past curfew. But the initial high didn't last. Over the next few months, they delved deeper into the lifestyle, attending parties and gatherings that became increasingly intimate. Their social circle expanded to include couples who seemed to thrive in this environment. Lila, in particular, flourished. Her confidence soared as she reveled in the attention she received from both men and women, her natural charm making her a favorite among their new friends. Zane, however, found himself retreating inward. The admiration others showed Lila, once a source of pride, began to feel like a threat. He noticed the way Eli's hand lingered a moment too long on Lila's shoulder, the way she laughed a little too freely at his jokes. Rationally, Zane understood this was part of the lifestyle, a game of trust and boundaries. But emotionally, it was a slow poison. The intimacy they had rediscovered began to erode under the weight of Zane's insecurities. He caught himself watching Lila's every interaction, searching for signs of something more. He started avoiding eye contact during encounters, unable to shake the gnawing feeling that he was losing her in ways he couldn't articulate. And Lila? She was too caught up in the excitement to notice. To her, the lifestyle had breathed new life into their marriage, opening doors she hadn't realized were closed. She couldn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface, the subtle ways Zane's jealousy and resentment were taking root. By the time autumn arrived, their marriage was a fragile shell of what it once was. The swinging community had promised adventure and connection, but for Zane, it had delivered only doubt and fear. The cracks in their relationship were no longer invisible. And soon, they would split wide open. By October, the once invigorating spark that Zane and Lila had rediscovered through swinging had turned into a slow-burning ember of unease. Their foray into this new world, meant to strengthen their bond, was now doing the opposite, pushing them further apart. While Lila seemed to thrive in the openness and excitement, Zane found himself consumed by a gnawing sense of inadequacy and jealousy that he couldn't ignore. The cracks began subtly, like whispers in a quiet room. Zane noticed how Lila seemed to gravitate toward Eli Sterling at every gathering. It wasn't just the laughter or the shared jokes, it was the way her eyes lit up in his presence, a brightness Zane hadn't seen directed at him in months. Eli, with his carefree charm and unshakable confidence, embodied everything Zane was not. And Zane hated him for it. It wasn't just Eli. The entire dynamic of their marriage felt off-kilter. Lila's newfound confidence, once something Zayn admired, now felt like a weapon turned against him. She was more radiant, more independent, and more distant. She had started spending more time in Denver, claiming it was for freelance projects, but Zayn couldn't shake the suspicion that her work wasn't the only thing keeping her in the city. One afternoon, as Zayn scrolled through their shared calendar, a notification caught his eye: "Coffee with Eli, the Velvet Bean, 2 p.m. His chest tightened. Rationally, he knew swinging was built on trust and boundaries. Lila had always emphasized that their lifestyle choices were purely physical and never emotional. But this felt personal. That evening, Zayn confronted her. "You're meeting him for coffee now?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Lila sighed, setting down her wine glass. "It's just coffee, Zayn. We're friends. That's all." "Friends," Zayn repeated, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. "You're spending more time with him than with me." Lila's patience, already worn thin, snapped. "Maybe if you didn't sulk in the corner every time we went out, I'd want to spend more time with you." The argument escalated quickly, both of them lashing out with words sharpened by months of unspoken resentment. Zayn accused Lila of prioritizing the lifestyle over their marriage, while Lila fired back that Zayn's insecurity was suffocating her. By the time the shouting stopped, they were left in icy silence, each retreating to opposite ends of the house. The fights became more frequent after that. They argued about everything: swinging, Lila's time in Denver, Zayn's increasing detachment at events. Lila, in a rare moment of vulnerability, suggested they take a break from the lifestyle and focus on themselves. But even this offer, meant as a gesture of reconciliation, only deepened the divide. "Oh, so now it's my fault?" Zayn snapped. "You want to pause because you've already gotten what you needed out of this, haven't you?" Lila's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. "You think I'm the problem? You're the one who can't handle this, Zayn. You agreed to this, remember?" "I agreed to save us, not to lose you," Zayn shot back. The tension spilled into other areas of their lives. At work, Zayn found it harder to focus. His once impeccable performance began slipping, and whispers of his erratic behavior reached his boss. Lila, too, struggled to meet deadlines for her freelance projects. Her usual creative spark was dulled by the emotional weight of their crumbling marriage. Even their closest friends began to notice the strain. At a Halloween party hosted by the Sterlings, Nina pulled Lila aside, her voice low with concern. "What's going on with you two?" she asked. "You're not yourselves lately." Lila forced a smile, brushing off the question. "Just growing pains," she replied, though the words felt hollow. Meanwhile, Zayn nursed a drink in the corner, watching Lila and Eli from across the room. The two were in deep conversation, their heads close together. Zayn's grip on his glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. Rationally, he knew there was nothing to worry about. But the quiet voice in the back of his mind, the one that whispered of betrayal and loss, refused to be silenced. As autumn deepened, the once quiet war between Zayn and Lila turned into an open battlefield. The fights grew louder, the silences more deafening. Zayn began digging through Lila's phone and emails, searching for proof of something he couldn't articulate but felt certain existed. Each discovery, a playful text from Eli, a calendar reminder for another meeting, felt like another dagger to his already fragile sense of control. For Lila, the constant accusations and surveillance became unbearable. She confided in Eli during one of their coffee meetings, her voice breaking as she admitted, "I don't know how much more of this I can take. He's not the man I married anymore." Eli, ever the confidant, placed a reassuring hand on hers. "Maybe it's time you ask yourself what you really want, Lila." That question lingered in her mind as she drove back to Willow Creek, the golden hues of the setting sun doing little to lift the weight in her chest. What did she want? Once, the answer had been simple: a life with Zayn, filled with love and shared dreams. But now, that life felt like a distant memory. Zayn's world, meanwhile, was spiraling out of control. His nights were consumed by sleepless hours spent replaying every interaction between Lila and Eli in his mind, searching for signs of betrayal. The man who once prided himself on composure was now ruled by paranoia and fear. Their marriage, once the envy of Willow Creek, had become a battleground of mistrust and unresolved anger. The cracks that had formed months ago were no longer cracks, they were gaping chasms, threatening to swallow them whole. And the worst was yet to come. The night of November 12, 2023, arrived cloaked in an eerie calm, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Zayn and Lila Blackwell prepared for what was meant to be another evening of shared indulgence, another gathering hosted by the charismatic Sterlings at their upscale penthouse in downtown Denver. But beneath their polished appearances and carefully chosen words, the tension between them simmered dangerously close to boiling over. The car ride to the party was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the tires on the highway. Zayn gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale against the leather. Lila sat beside him, staring out the window, her reflection in the glass a haunting mirror of her inner turmoil. They hadn't spoken since their last fight 2 nights ago, a bitter argument about her increasing closeness with Eli Sterling. As they pulled up to the penthouse, the city lights glittered like false promises in the distance. Zayn took a deep breath, his jaw clenched, and stepped out of the car. Lila followed, adjusting her black dress, a sleek, daring piece that accentuated her figure. Zayn noticed, of course, but instead of pride, it stirred something darker within him. She was beautiful, radiant even, and tonight, that felt like a threat. The party was already in full swing when they arrived. The penthouse was alive with soft, colorful lights and a curated playlist of sensual music that pulsed through hidden speakers. Couples mingled with drinks in hand, their laughter and flirtation filling the air. The Sterlings, as always, were the perfect hosts. Nina greeted them warmly, her shimmering gold jumpsuit catching the light as she embraced Lila with genuine affection. Eli followed moments later, clapping Zayn on the back with an almost brotherly camaraderie before placing a gentle kiss on Lila's cheek. Zayn's stomach nodded, the gesture feeling too intimate, too casual. He forced a smile, masking the storm brewing within him. For the first hour, Zayn tried to play his part. He mingled, exchanged pleasantries, even laughed at a joke or two. But his attention always drifted back to Lila. She was the center of the room, her laughter carrying across the space as she moved effortlessly from group to group. And then there was Eli, always nearby, his presence a constant irritant, like a splinter Zayn couldn't remove. As the night wore on, the party shifted gears. Guests began pairing off or forming smaller groups, disappearing into the various playrooms the Sterlings had set up. Zayn found himself alone, nursing a drink he didn't want, his eyes scanning the room for Lila. She was gone. Panic and anger flared in equal measure as he moved through the penthouse, his heart pounding in his chest. He found her near the balcony, deep in conversation with Eli. Their heads were close, their voices low. Zayn caught the tail end of their exchange, something about meeting for coffee later that week. Lila's eyes widened slightly when she noticed him approaching, a flicker of guilt flashing across her face before she composed herself. "Zayn," she said, her tone light but wary. "I was just talking to Eli about." "It's time to go," Zayn interrupted, his voice tight and barely controlled. His eyes didn't leave Eli, whose casual smirk only fueled Zayn's growing rage. Lila hesitated. "The night isn't over." "It's over for us," Zayn snapped. The tension between them was palpable, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. Eli raised his hands in mock surrender, his tone disarmingly calm. "Hey, no need to make a scene. Let's all take a breath." "You don't get to tell me what to do," Zayn hissed, his words dripping with venom. Before the argument could escalate further, Nina appeared, sliding between them like a practiced diplomat. "Why don't we move this to a quieter spot?" she suggested, her voice soothing. She guided Zayn and Lila to a corner of the room, offering them water and gentle words of advice about communication and respect. For a brief moment, it seemed like she had diffused the situation. But as they prepared to leave, Zayn caught sight of Eli watching them from across the room. His expression was unreadable: concern, pity, or something else entirely. It was the final crack in Zayn's fragile composure. The drive home was suffocatingly silent. Lila stared out the window, her earlier vibrancy replaced by a wary exhaustion. Zayn gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his jaw clenched as his mind replayed every moment of the evening. The laughter, the looks, the touch on Lila's cheek, all of it fanned the flames of his jealousy into a raging inferno. When they finally pulled into the driveway of Blackwell Manor, neither of them moved to exit the car immediately. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken accusations and unacknowledged fears. Finally, Lila turned to Zayn, her voice soft but resolute. "We need to talk about this. We can't keep going like this." Zayn didn't respond. Instead, he stepped out of the car and walked to the house, leaving the door open behind him. Lila followed, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Inside, the tension erupted. Words that had been bottled up for months spilled out in a torrent of accusations and defenses. Zayn raged about her behavior at the party, dissecting every interaction with Eli as proof of betrayal. Lila, stunned at first, quickly found her own anger rising to meet his. She reminded him that the lifestyle had been a mutual choice, that she had always been honest with him. Their voices rose, echoing through the house like the prelude to a storm. And then, in a moment of heated desperation, Zayn grabbed Lila's arm, his grip tight enough to make her cry out. "Let go of me," she shouted, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. But Zayn, lost in his jealousy and rage, didn't let go. In her struggle to break free, Lila's hand lashed out, scratching his cheek. The sharp sting jolted him, and before he realized what he was doing, he shoved her away. It happened in an instant. Lila stumbled, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. She fell backward, her arms flailing as she tried to catch herself, but there was nothing to grab. Her head struck the corner of the oak coffee table with a sickening thud. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Zayn's ragged breathing. He stood frozen, staring at Lila's motionless body sprawled on the floor. Blood pooled beneath her head, a stark contrast against the polished wood. "Lila," he whispered, his voice breaking as he dropped to his knees beside her. "Lila, wake up." But she didn't move. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave, leaving him gasping for air. Somewhere outside, a neighbor walking his dog paused, startled by the sound of a man's anguished cry piercing the still night. A cry that would haunt Willow Creek for years to come. The quiet calm of Willow Creek was shattered in the early hours of November 13, 2023, as flashing red and blue lights bathed the tree-lined streets. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, their breath visible in the cold morning air as they exchanged hushed whispers. Inside Blackwell Manor, the once pristine living room was a crime scene. Lila Blackwell's lifeless body lay sprawled on the polished wood floor, partially covered by a white sheet. The deep gash on her temple told a grim story, and the blood pooling beneath her head had begun to dry. Nearby, Zayn Blackwell sat slumped in a dining room chair, his face pale, his hands trembling as he stared at the blood smeared across them. His shirt was stained, his cheek bore fresh scratches, and his eyes, bloodshot and unfocused, flickered between shock and despair. Detective Rachel Frost arrived just as the coroner was preparing to move the body. A seasoned investigator from Denver's Homicide Division, Frost's sharp eyes took in every detail as she ducked under the yellow crime scene tape. She had seen plenty of crime scenes in her career, but the stark contrast between the Blackwells' meticulously curated home and the violence that had occurred inside gave her pause. "Talk to me," she said, her tone clipped, addressing Dr. Ken Nakamura, the forensic pathologist on scene. Dr. Nakamura gestured toward Lila's body. Blunt force trauma to the head, likely from impact with the corner of the coffee table. There are bruises on her arms consistent with being grabbed and defensive wounds on her hands. It's consistent with a struggle. Detective Frost's gaze shifted to Zane, seated just a few feet away. He hadn't moved since she arrived, his head hanging low, his fingers trembling in his lap. "What's his story?" Officer Daniels, the first responder on the scene, handed her his notebook. "He claims it was an accident. Said they were arguing, she tried to pull away, and he shoved her. Claims she tripped over the rug and hit her head." "Does he seem credible?" Frost asked, scanning the details written in Daniels' notes. Daniels hesitated. "He's emotional, but something about his story feels rehearsed. It's like he's already decided what to say." Frost nodded, her instincts buzzing. "Bag his clothes and test his hands for blood spatter," she ordered. "I want this room photographed from every angle. And someone pull their phone records. Let's see what kind of argument we're dealing with here." As officers began their work, Frost walked slowly through the room, her eyes darting over the skewed furniture and scattered shards of a broken vase. Her gaze landed on the coffee table, its sharp corner stained dark red. She crouched down, noting the height of the stain and the surrounding blood pattern. Something about the trajectory didn't sit right. "It doesn't look like a fall to me," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. The investigation into Lila's death revealed the secrets their neighbors never suspected. Interviews with friends and colleagues painted a picture of a marriage unraveling under the weight of jealousy, mistrust, and unresolved tensions. Eli and Nina Sterling, central figures in the Blackwell's swinging community, became crucial witnesses. Nina described the argument she had witnessed at the party the night before. "Zane was livid," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "It was like he couldn't control himself." Lila looked scared. Eli, however, was less forthcoming. His tone was measured, almost rehearsed. "Lila and I were just friends," he insisted when asked about their relationship. "Zane's jealousy got the better of him. That's all." The Sterling's accounts, while helpful, only deepened Frost's suspicions. She turned her focus to the digital trail Lila and Zane had left behind. Text messages between Lila and Eli were telling. They revealed a growing closeness, discussions of shared frustrations, and even subtle hints that Lila was considering leaving Zane. One message, sent just days before her death, struck Frost like a hammer. Lila to Eli, "I can't keep living like this. He's not the man I married. I need to find a way out." Forensic analysis further complicated Zane's claim of a simple accident. The angle and force of Lila's fatal injury didn't align with her simply falling backward. DNA evidence under Lila's fingernails matched Zane's, corroborating the signs of a struggle. Then came the toxicology reports. While Lila had consumed a moderate amount of alcohol at the party, Zane's blood alcohol level was significantly higher. This suggested impaired judgment, potentially explaining his aggressive behavior, but it also weakened his credibility. And then there was the financial motive. Frost's team uncovered recent inquiries Zane had made about their life insurance policy. The timing, combined with Lila's text messages, painted a darker picture, one of a man feeling cornered by his wife's potential departure and the collapse of his carefully constructed life. The final twist came from Eli Sterling himself. After weeks of mounting pressure, he admitted to Frost that Lila had confided in him about her plans to leave Zane. "She told me she couldn't do it anymore," Eli said, his voice subdued. "She wanted a clean break. She even talked about moving to Denver full-time." This revelation provided a potential motive. Zane wasn't just losing his wife emotionally. He was about to lose her entirely, and with her, the image of perfection he had spent years building. When Frost brought Zane in for a second round of questioning, she didn't hold back. Armed with the evidence, she confronted him with the text messages, the financial records, and the forensic findings. "You said it was an accident," she began, her tone sharp. "But the evidence doesn't support that. The bruises on her arms, the force of the injury, the DNA under her nails, this wasn't just a shove, Zane. What really happened?" Zane's composure cracked. His voice wavered as he repeated his story, but the details began to unravel. He stammered, his words conflicting with his earlier account. Frost pressed harder. "She was going to leave you, wasn't she? That's what this is really about. You couldn't handle losing her." "No!" Zane shouted, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt her. She was pushing me away, and He stopped, his breath ragged, his eyes brimming with tears. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." As Frost left the room, she knew one thing for certain: the cracks in Zane's story weren't just cracks anymore. They were chasms, and the truth was about to swallow him whole. The investigation was complete. All that remained was to take the case to court, and let justice decide what Zane Blackwell truly deserved. The trial of Zane Blackwell captivated the city and beyond, drawing attention not only for its salacious details but also for the devastating portrait it painted of a marriage spiraling into chaos. Reporters dubbed it the suburban swinger murder, a headline designed to shock and entice, but beneath the sensationalism lay a deeply human tragedy, a tale of love, trust, and jealousy gone terribly wrong. The prosecution, led by Vivian Shao, wasted no time laying out their case. In her opening statement, she described Zane as a man consumed by his insecurities and a need for control. This wasn't just a tragic accident, she told the jury. This was the culmination of months of jealousy, mistrust, and a desperate attempt to maintain power over a wife who was ready to leave him. The evidence was damning. Forensic reports revealed that the trajectory and force of Lila's fatal injury were inconsistent with a simple fall. DNA under her fingernails confirmed a struggle, and text messages between Lila and Eli Sterling exposed her intentions to leave the marriage. The prosecution even presented Zane's inquiries into life insurance policies, suggesting financial desperation as an underlying motive. On the other side, Howard Timmons, Zane's defense attorney, painted a different picture. He described a devoted husband overwhelmed by circumstances he didn't fully understand. Zane Blackwell isn't a murderer, Timmons argued. He's a man who made a tragic mistake in a moment of emotional turmoil. The trial reached its peak when Zane himself took the stand. His carefully rehearsed testimony portrayed him as a man deeply in love with his wife, blindsided by her emotional distance and growing attachment to another man. But under cross-examination, Vivian Shao tore his narrative apart. Confronted with his conflicting accounts and mounting evidence, Zane's calm facade began to crumble. His voice cracked as he recounted the final argument, and the jury saw glimpses of the anger and desperation that had driven him that night. After 2 weeks of emotional testimony, closing arguments brought the courtroom to a tense silence. Shao urged the jury to hold Zane accountable, to see through his pleas of regret and recognize the deliberate actions that led to Lila's death. Timmons, in contrast, appealed to the jury's empathy, framing Zane as a flawed man who had lost control in a moment of weakness. It took the jury less than 6 hours to reach a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence came swiftly, 25 years to life in prison. As the gavel struck, Zane's face was a mask of devastation. He had lost everything: his wife, his freedom, and the carefully constructed life he had fought so hard to maintain. In the wake of the trial, the community of Willow Creek was left to grapple with the revelations that had come to light. The case exposed the hidden world of swinging within suburban circles, sparking heated debates about morality, trust, and the fragility of modern relationships. Some couples who had participated in the lifestyle quietly distanced themselves, fearful of judgment or scandal. Others became outspoken advocates for ethical non-monogamy, emphasizing the importance of communication, consent, and emotional boundaries. For those closest to the Blackwells, the tragedy served as a cautionary tale. Friends and family were left questioning how such a seemingly perfect couple could have unraveled so completely. Was it the lifestyle itself that doomed them, or was it merely a magnifying glass for cracks that were already there? The story of Zane and Lila Blackwell is more than just a sensational crime. It's a reminder of how fragile relationships can be when trust is broken and emotions are left unchecked. Their journey from love to tragedy illustrates the dangers of unresolved insecurities, poor communication, and the toxic effects of jealousy. As Zane sits in a prison cell, replaying the events of that fateful night, the weight of his actions is a burden he will carry for the rest of his life. And for those who knew the Blackwells, their story remains a haunting reminder of how quickly a life can spiral out of control. What do you think about the story of Zane and Lila Blackwell? Was Zane a victim of circumstance, or was his jealousy a ticking time bomb from the start? Do you believe the swinging lifestyle contributed to their downfall, or was it just an accelerant to existing issues? Could Lila have done anything differently to avoid this tragic end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story or found it thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales like this one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.